All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here again. We're at our very first ever LAC Summit. We've got a whole week of sharing and learning, and it's so great to see so many people coming back because each of our sessions are such excellent learning opportunities, and the more that people can come and participate, the more that we can really learn and grow from one another, which is what the LAC is all about. Before we jump in with today's session, which is led by Lara, I just want to take a moment to tell you a bit about the purpose of this summit and who's leading it. So my name is Emma Burns. I am the Professional Learning Coordinator at Consilience, which is the sponsor of this event and is also the company that runs the Learning Analytics Collaborative. So I know we've got lots of people in the call who are members of Learning Analytics Collaborative. And if you're not, please reach out because we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you join us. We can arrange a demo call anytime. And what really makes the LAC special is, as you can see, we've got this community that we create and the opportunities that we have to share and learn and grow together. So for anyone who's not already aware, the LAC is a platform and a service that works together for schools that want to use learning analytics to improve and transform. So our mission is really to support you to build those cultures of data use. And we do that by helping you, first of all, collect all of the data that you have in your school, not just your academic grades, but also demographic data, well-being data, all the data. And then we help you figure out the best way to present it as information so that you can answer the questions that you have. We also then teach users how to use it. And we provide protocols and tools and webinars like this one so that your community can gain insight about your learners. We have over 100 pre-built visualizations, and each one of them has been customized to answer the questions that schools have. So when you join the LAC, you get to find other answers that schools have already explored and use those visualizations. And if there's one that doesn't exist, we help you to create it, because if it's good for you, it's going to be good for everyone else in the collaborative too. So you'll find that we have dashboards for teachers who want to see their class, dashboards for specialists, for example, EAL or learning support staff who want to look at the impact of different interventions. We've got dashboards that are high-level aggregate data for administrators, board, marketing teams, things like that. And we have dashboards for parents and students who want to see an individual's learning data over time. Lots and lots of things on the LAC platform. And we have over 50 schools now that are part of that collaborative. We're all about sharing the learning. So when one school develops a protocol or a use case or a different visualization, we share that information with other schools so that we can all learn and grow. And that, of course, brings me to what we're doing right now, which is our very first ever summit. And it's really all about sharing those stories and hearing from different schools how they're using the platform and how they're developing as a culture of data use. So I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. Her name is Lara Manasfi. She has been an elementary principal in lots of schools all around the world. Most recently, she was at ISM in Myanmar, which is an LAC school, and she became such an LAC super fan that she is now working with us as a professional learning provider for schools in Africa. And so I'm really excited to hear from her and the hits and misses, the do's and the do nots that she's found with her experience in building a data culture at ISM. As she does her presentation, you might have some questions. You can put those in the chat, and then we'll have an opportunity to share them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so over to you, Lara. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Give me a second and I will get started with today's session. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so as Emma mentioned, it is loading from my end. Hopefully you guys can see the session. As Emma mentioned, the session today is about hits and misses from protocols and developing a data culture. This has been the journey of the school that we were at, that I was working at in Myanmar over the last 5 years. And it's really kind of putting all those ideas together and what it looks like and some of the learning lessons from this journey. So for today's takeaways or the essential questions, the conversation is going to be focused around 3 areas. One is, what is data culture and why is it important? And then, how do I develop a data culture and what to look for and some of the protocols that can be used? And along the way, I will be talking about hits and misses as I'm talking about those 2 different areas and end it with some hits and misses as well. Okay, to start with, can you start thinking about why does data culture in schools matter? Can you take 30 seconds, put some notes in the chat box, just reflecting why, in your opinion, does it matter to have a data culture in schools? Don't be shy, put it in the chat box. At this time, I'm not seeing anything. Review student progress without everyone understanding the why and believing in using data. Inform decisions based on evidence to advise university. Exactly. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sure there's a whole lot more as well, but hopefully this will help us kind of look at things through the same lens. So why is data culture and why is it important? Well, we know that assessment data has always been used to measure the success of students, of teachers and schools. And as a school, we use it also to look at how we compare to other schools as well, and how do we compete with them. And this drives the policy, the funding, and the resource allocation. If we're doing well in one area or not, we want to put more funding in particular areas. So we know this. However, we also know that simply having data is not enough. I always like to give the example of, standing. My goal is to lose weight. I stand on the scale every single day and I collect data on a regular basis. But if I'm looking at the data and I'm not doing anything to lose weight, that's really useless. It's all there. I'm not looking at it. I'm not analyzing it. I'm not looking at when am I gaining weight? When am I losing weight? So looking at it and having it is not enough. So as a school, we were struggling with DRIP syndrome. The DRIP syndrome is you're data rich, you're information poor because of our ability to organize, to process, and understand the data. We also had some one-off events where data was used only superficially to check a box. So for example, we're coming up to an accreditation, so let's just collect all the data, use it, and put it on the side and not continue the process of looking at it and analyzing it. In addition to that, data use was inconsistent or inappropriate, or it occurred in silos. So sometimes it happened, we would look at MAP in one grade level, but we would look at different data in a different division, for example, and not have those communications with divisions within grade levels. The education industry has experienced a surge in innovation, and you all know now there's a lot of dashboards, there's a lot of platforms that you can go to access data that makes it more meaningful. An example of this is LAC, an excellent dashboard where you can go in and look at all this data and you can make meaning of it. But if schools do not invest in creating a data culture or in people to understand and how to use the data, really all that effort has gone to waste. And the dashboards won't help. So if we're going to rise to the challenge of truly helping students grow in learning, we felt at ISM that we needed better data, we needed stronger data culture, and so that we can make informed and more equitable decisions on how we're going to improve our educational experiences and the outcome of all of our students. And for that, when we made that decision, we felt that was a hit. That was our why. So then we started thinking, how are we going to develop the data culture, what protocols we're going to use? And there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of resources, there's a lot of strategies, there's a lot of definitions. In the presentation today, I'm just going to quickly tackle and touch upon these three areas. But this is not something that we decided as a school we're going to follow. We did not say we're going to adopt a particular path. What we did, we know that effective leadership is when it's frequent and when it is strategic. So when you want to do something, it's important that you communicate on a regular basis and you make sure that it's a frequent communication. And we know that creating a culture of data is about people. It's not just about the data. It's about putting that information out there and working with the team. So that's why we felt it was important to get teachers, students, and families excited about this and see the value in using as well as looking at the data. So, as I mentioned, basically we took bits and pieces from different information that's out there. We worked closely with LAC as well, and we started with the why. That is something we always do. I'm sure almost everyone is familiar with Simon Sinek, always start with the why. So if we operate on all three levels, what we do, how we do it, and why we do it, without articulating the why, really all of that work is gone to waste. So as a school, we had to think about why are we going to create a data culture? And why is this important? Why do we value this? And why do we want to move forward with this? So we started with the why. And then our work kind of focused under these four big umbrellas around leadership, governance, strategy, and literacy. Around leadership, we thought, how do we build a community and a culture? How do we create structures and schedules and protocols? How do we use assessment and data and set goals? And how do we support the teaching and learning and professional growth? So we kind of put them under big ideas. So building a community and culture, and these are, most of them we felt were a hit. And of course, as a journey, when you're working with this, you will find that you cannot do an excellent job in all areas. So in some areas we were doing well and not always regularly. Sometimes you find you do really well in one area and you do really poorly in another area. So it was up and down. However, the progress overall was ongoing. So we started with the why, and then we developed a shared vision and communicated clear priorities. Clarity and communication were big, and that was really, really important. And we tried to generate and sustain excitement. And I think what we did really well with the excitement is that more so with the teachers, with the students, we were not that successful with that. With the parents, it wasn't clearly communicated, but with the teachers, that was an ongoing conversation so that we could see the value and develop and share a common value. So cultivating a culture of shared values, promoting a data-driven mindset across the school, and reflective of equitable and inclusive learning community. We would often go to conversations when we're looking at data. It's important that we're not looking at data that reinforces what we believe, that if this is a student that needs help, we're seeing data that actually supports this. It's data that reflects and supports everyone, so it gives access to everyone as well. We looked at setting goals and communicating those goals and celebrating collective progress towards those goals. And we did this on a regular schedules. When we would have all school meetings, oftentimes those would be communicated with the faculty, what we're doing well, where we're growing, and what are the areas we're going to continue to tackle, and celebrating the successes of the divisions, or the teams, or the departments, or individuals also when needed. So the other one was creating schedules and structures, and that is very, very important. Defining a structure for data management and ensuring quality, security, and access. For us, we had access to iReady, to NWA, a lot of dashboards and College Board and all of that. So we actually decided we're going to use LAC dashboard because it's secure, it ensures quality, and it's easy access for everyone. So that helped us move forward in that decision, and it helped the process of ensuring that everyone actually is looking at the same thing as well. Scoping out the year is a key element. You start with the end in mind. We looked at where do we want to start, how often we're going to actually have PD days, and when we're going to do it and how we're going to do it, so that we understand when do we review, when do we reflect, when do we have conversations around the data, when do we celebrate it. Creating and communicating consistently and revisiting the expectations, along with developing an effective schedule to support the goal. And I do say revisiting, because revisiting is not just around expectations, it's revisiting everything you're doing. If it's not working, we would just look at it and say, let's just make a shift. Let's go back and ask, go back to the why, make a shift, create something different that's going to meet our needs. And allocating resources, whether it's time, materials, or professional development, those need to be embedded in the schedule and in the structure so that they are intentional and explicit. And we felt that it was important to designate and empower educators or the champions of the program. When you see that some teachers or some leaders are more passionate about what you're doing, actually provide support so that the work is disseminated. It's not only in one group, it's in different groups as well. And then they can support their colleagues in that process. And whether it means empowering them with providing them more PD support or giving them more time to support their colleagues, whatever that looks like in every institution. And the use of protocols, of course, that was always handy, and it's important so that you can actually create a structure. And we'll talk more about protocols later. The other one is around strategy, using assessments and data to set goals. So it's very important, we felt, to determine what data we're going to collect so it aligns with the goals. For example, one of the goals we had was we wanted to improve reading scores. So it's important that right from the beginning, what scores are we going to collect so that we can actually start looking at and analyzing, and we're all on the same page and working in the same direction. Using reliable and up-to-date data as the basis for strategic decision-making. And that is key and important. While data is important, teachers know their students a lot and way better than what we see on the computers. So some of the systems and the dashboards give you the option to see and tell you that, hey, there's something off with the information, with the data that we're receiving about a particular student. So that's why it's important that you triangulate, or that you look at multiple resources of data, not just one, and you look at teacher input as well into this process so that you know, if we're gonna move forward with this, have we looked at 3 points of data? Have we spoken to the teachers? Does it make sense? And then you form decisions based on that. Engaging in regular data analysis that drives instructional priorities. This is quite important because once you start looking at the data, as I mentioned, we're looking at reading. Okay, so we want to work on this. What are the instructional priorities, and how is this going to drive the planning process? How is this going to drive the resources and the work that you're going to, and the time management as well? Using protocols, as I mentioned earlier, and sharing data with the community, setting goals, and progress monitoring. So we were really good about sharing data and progress with our teachers. I don't think we did a good job sharing that information with the parents as much. We would set goals and share them with our teachers and develop them with the teachers as a team as well. And we would monitor the progress and compare ourselves to other schools and see how we're moving forward with the journey. But with the teachers, and especially after we saw that LAC had an element where you can share information with parents that you get to pick and choose, that was a miss for us. Then now looking back, we go, that is something we could have taken advantage of so that the data culture is not just in the school system, but actually in the school community as well. And the last one is around literacy. So it is important to empower all employees at all levels to understand and use the data effectively in their roles. So oftentimes when we think of understanding the data, we think of the teachers, we think of the leaders, we think of the teaching assistants, but really we found we need to think broader than that. We need to think of the operations side of the school, the admissions officers and director in HR, because it's important that everyone has a clear sense of who we are as a school. And when we're looking at admissions data, the admissions director needs to be able to look at the students that are coming in and understand where do they fit in with the student population that we have at our school? What's the support that we're going to be able to give them so that we have that clear communication with the incoming families as well? Block off times for educators to plan and collaborate, not only on PD days and on early release days, but also perhaps in common planning times, scheduling it in the time so that we're not going to put enough priorities or emphasis on this and give them the time and the space to do this, they already have other things to do on their plate. So we need to say, if we're honoring this and that's important for us and we value it, we need to provide time and block off time for this. Providing guidance to ensure that the planning and the instruction reflect the practices and the insight from the relevant data. This is where we felt that we had to work very closely. We worked with the director of academics or director of curriculum and the teachers, looking at the data and then embedding those practices in our planners and giving some strategies to support the work that we're doing. Providing access to professional PD that is going to help people grow in this area, whether it's in practices or an understanding of how to unpack the data, and cultivating a climate of ongoing collaboration, growth, and reflection. So when we looked at all of these, of course, we did not do all of them pretty well. Some of them we did really, really well, some of them we did okay, and some of them were misses. As I mentioned earlier, the role of the parent in the process, for us, we would communicate the vision, we talk about big goals and progress, but we did not talk about how we're moving forward with data with the parents. We did not show them our goals. We did not actually break it down and provide them with training. We shared a lot of data with the parents. We shared report cards, assessment reports. We would talk about our AP scores, and we would send information so the parents would understand how to read the data. But now looking back, I think we could have done a better job actually providing training for the parents so they can understand it and then do it on a regular basis as well. And then also giving them access to the dashboard so that they can look at it and look at ongoing progress of their child in a particular area that we're talking about. And ensuring that all employees at all levels understand and use the data effectively, which is what I had mentioned earlier. Deferring priorities impacting schedules and divisional meetings. So oftentimes, and I find this to be true in every work environment, when we start with priorities, we start from the top, we decide these are the priorities for the year. But we also, when we look at it and it goes down, let's say it starts from the director, it goes down to the principals or the leadership team. The leadership team has other priorities as well. So that priority is going down to the additional priorities. The leadership team passes down those priorities as well to the teachers and the teacher leaders in that departments, and they have their own priorities as well. So by the time it gets to the teaching level or the divisional meeting times, there's so many priorities you need to meet with. And so it's difficult at times to meet the needs unless you're very intentional and purposeful. So there are times when we would actually push aside the data conversations because we need to take care of other things. And so that's something that was a hit and miss at times. The transient nature of international schools with roles of leaders and teachers in ensuring that practices, schedules, and roles are regular and ongoing. And this is an ongoing challenge for international schools. You know, people come and leave. And it's important, if we value a school with a data culture, that we start looking at it as how do we embed and ensure that what was started continues to stay with the school, that it's part of the institutional memory as opposed to it leaves with people. And that was something that was ongoing, and one of the hits or the misses, a big miss that I will talk about at the end of the session. And equally and fully engaging students in the process at all levels. We were more successful at doing this in the upper school, perhaps upper elementary, middle school, and high school. However, in the lower elementary, not so much, and that's an area that needs to be looked upon, especially that as a school, we did not do student-led conferences, and we did not engage students in that process. And I do feel these are areas that were important enough to build a culture around students and parents, and not just teachers. Okay, let's take another just quick break. For you looking, you've seen what a data culture is for us at Myanmar in our journey and our story. And in which area do you think your school or your team is strongest at or weakest at? Take a couple of minutes, or let's say 1 minute because of the time, and just put those in the chat box, please, and share your thoughts with us. Yeah, mobilizing data from multiple apps and platforms. We have yet to define the why in efficient ways, using a consistent data protocol. And Addie, Addie, you had mentioned our weakest area is using a consistent data protocol. And when we talk about protocols later, I think that's a very important key point about, do we continue to use, and I don't know if I have the answer, but do we continue to use the same data protocol, or do we shift based on our needs as well? Okay, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. You can certainly continue to add your thoughts and we'll look at them later. So now we're going to talk about protocols. And I love this photo because it makes it look like it's a directive and we have to follow protocols. But in reality, protocols are very, very valuable. And there's a need why we follow protocols. And it also helps us revisit our why for clarity and purpose. And so it's important to ask ourselves, is it important that the school uses the same protocol throughout the process every year so everyone's familiar with it and they know, and that one protocol? Or do we ask ourselves and say, is there a particular protocol that's going to meet our need based on what we're looking at and working on? So for us, we used protocols. We used a variety of protocols, not just one. And protocols are important because they help guide conversations when data is the focal point. The approach, because it's structured, it creates a safe space for all the participants. It supports equity of voice, and it allows all members to describe the data and make inferences and share the implications for future work. So it really ensures that everyone has a say and everyone is actually thinking and contributing. At our school, we used Atlas, looking at data. We looked at the flow routine. We looked at here's what, so what, now what. We used the WOCQ when we worked with LAC, Wonder, Observe, Connect, and Question. And there were some thinking routines as well. And we've used other stuff. However, I'm only going to go over some of these. So Atlas, looking at data protocol, this can be done at a divisional level, at a grade level. It is very prescriptive and easy to use, and it's easy to follow. Pretty much you start with the facts. What do we see? You interpret and you start wondering, what does the data suggest? And then what does this mean for our work? And you go into next steps. So what are we going to do? And then I linked it, I will share the resources as well. What it is, as I mentioned, it's quite prescriptive and it tells you how many minutes to spend on each one. It gives you the questions, you follow it. And when you practice it, you practice the protocol and everyone's familiar with it, then you can start moving forward and doing. First, you do it as a division, which is what we did. And then once everyone was familiar with it, they were looking at the data collectively, and then start doing it by grade level because there's more familiarity with the process. And you feedback also, and you say, how did the process work out for you? And you adjust accordingly. So that was a successful protocol. Another one was the flow routine. And the flow routine is a very simple and easy routine. And you really, when you look at them, they all share commonalities, which are first, look at the data. Look at it, describe it, what does it tell you? And then you start wondering, what do you notice about the data? And you specify, what is it exactly that we're looking at or working with? Are we looking at reading data? Are we looking at math data? Are we looking at a particular strand? And then once you're done sharing and noticing, wondering and noticing, you go into the sharing. You start sharing your thinking with people. Now, this was used in two different ways. The first time, when we wanted people to just understand and read and describe the data and start thinking about the data, we ended the protocol there. When we wanted people to start actually developing an action plan and going deeper into the data, we added a step, an action plan, and we would have more specific questions to help guide the action plan process. Another protocol we used is here's what, so what, now what. And a lot of accreditation agencies use this. And it really goes back to what I was talking about earlier. If you stand on the scale, you read it every single day. I'm gaining weight, I'm gaining weight, I'm gaining weight. Why am I gaining weight? And then plan of action. What am I going to do to lose the weight? And that's the same process. You look at, describe the data, interpret the data, and create an action plan. And the action plan is always key because it's important to do something about it. And as you can see, the arrows, they go around in circle because it's important that this is an ongoing conversation. It doesn't end. Another protocol we used was, what do you wonder? What do you observe? What connections can you make? And what questions can you ask? And again, we've used this once just to get people to look at the data. And when, for example, I'm going to go back to the flow routine. When we use the flow routine, we use it with a particular dashboard. We were using iReady at a time. We used it with that dashboard to help people understand how to read the data from the dashboard. And then the next step was, okay, now you know how to read the data from the dashboard, create an action plan that is purposeful for your class and your students. With this, we started exploring LAC, a dashboard that actually uses multiple data entries, data points. We were looking at MAP, iReady, and WIDA information. And so we asked the teachers to sit down in teams. We all sat down and looked at it. What do you see? What do you wonder about a particular area? It was around reading. What do you notice? What do you look at? What questions do you have? And then the second time we did this, we moved it and we did it with actually Emma. And the next step was create an action plan. And then the action plan was very specific. They did it in a grade level. And at times they can also, what is my accountability? What is my role in this whole process? There are some thinking routines also that you can go to and use, a variety of ones. One of the examples was, and actually they have data analysis sheets, like 3 different parts that you can use, and it's a system, same thing. Assemble the data, articulate the indicators of the data, and then they encourage people to use see, think, wonder, or parts and complexities, or line-by-line coding. But the idea is to get conversations going, but to revisit actually and look at, is what we're doing making an impact, which is really, really key. And we did not use this at our school. But what we did, we looked at other areas, we looked at the bigger data to see, is there an impact? However, there are really a lot of strategies and protocols out there that will help you zoom in on really small information to see, is this particular strategy or intervention helping us meet the growth goals that we have set for ourselves? So when you look at data, I think it's important, at protocols, sorry, I think it's important to ask, do we want to use the same set of protocol throughout the year? Or do we want to look at asking, what do we want out of this exercise? What are we doing? And then let's target and find a protocol that we can use with our team. Adaptive Schools has a series of protocols that are really particular to the needs that you have. If you're working on different areas, you can pick and choose and say, what is going to meet our needs? And that's why I always say, always start with the why and then communicate. That's why we're doing this protocol, because the goal for this is today. And going back to the importance of people knowing those protocols and using them on a regular basis, so that you are investing in time wisely, and people are looking at this and creating a data culture that everyone knows these protocols, everyone understands when to use them, and even in a better world, actually knowing to use them in their own grade level meetings so that they can meet their own needs. So one last time, I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat box. And I'm hoping, if you are using protocols at your schools that you're familiar with and you think are useful, do you mind putting them in the chat box? What we can do, we're going to collate those and then we share them with the group, because these are useful protocols that everyone can use and actually share in their school community, kind of like a toolbox. So let's take 1 minute and start putting the protocols in the chat box, please.
Lara, something that I've been thinking about is similar to what you're saying about, do we go with one protocol or many protocols? And it's almost like there's a macro protocol and a micro protocol for me, you know, so I think we need to be consistent in this macro protocol, which is that we're going to make a decision and we're going to do it in a data-informed way. So we're going to look at the data and we're going to ask a question, and then we're going to make some kind of action. And that's like the macro process that we follow every single time. But what it looks like on this day for this particular data set could be different. Could be that the micro protocol is going to be WOCQ or
Yes.
CC or something. Yeah, so then you
Yeah.
get that consistency, but still the flexibility.
Yeah, I like that. Micro, macro actually is a good way also to remember it. Use data. Meeting norms, not jumping the ladder of inferences. Great.
And
Great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, I'm taking a note of
As I
what
mentioned,
people are saying.
go ahead.
Yeah, you go.
Thank you. Okay. So now, what are some of the lessons learned overall? Because I did mention earlier some of the hits and the misses, more or less. But I think the big takeaways for us were around the why. Starting with the why, we felt because it helped us always ask ourselves, if we're taking on doing something new, does this align with our why? So it really connected everything we're doing with the why and the progress. If we're communicating on progress, if we're communicating on growth and successes, everything we were doing was connected to the why. That helped us stay aligned and intentional about the use of data. It helped us have a clear vision and a purpose for data use. The stakeholders were enabled to make informed decisions about what data to collect and how to use it, and to identify needs, and more importantly, make program changes and evaluate priorities. And I'm going to give an example. When we started saying, we're going to look at the data on a regular basis and make decisions based on that, we were able to analyze and look at all school data. And we noticed we were weak in a particular area just by looking at our high school data, secondary school data. And in one particular area, our students were not performing as we had anticipated them to perform in research. And so the team at the time sat down, worked on this together and say, okay, we're going to change the program. We're going to create something at the end of grade 5, at the end of grade 8, which is still ongoing. And they worked very closely with the director of curriculum and academic programs on ensuring that this actually starts from the school way behind. Like, we started to work backwards with the end in mind to improve that program or the results in that area. And we've done this in a variety of areas as well. And because we had access to this and we knew why we're using the data and why we're using this dashboard, it enabled us to say, you know what, we're going to make decisions and we're going to change the program because we believe this is the right thing to do. And the data tells us so. Another hit, we felt that investing in technology platforms and in the training, that is very, very important because it gives everyone direct, dynamic, and real-time access to the data, with the understanding that people have different access depending on their roles at the school. But that was very important, and we felt that using a dashboard that connection, no.
You're good. You're back.
Okay. Sorry, power went out. That's good. Okay. And all of this, and same thing with iReady, for example, and NWA, they tell you, you can look at it and see how the student is performing on the spot. We use judgment and we say, okay, let's get additional data so that we can work on this. Another element that we felt was a hit, structuring and scheduling and prioritizing data conversations. So scheduling those in our PD days and in our divisional meetings and getting everyone to work on this and ensuring that from the beginning of the year, we have blocked off time for this, that was important and essential. Talking about the data all the time, not just at the end of the school year. And this is quite important because it's not enough, as I mentioned at the beginning, it was on and off and it was in silos. Actually, if we're a data culture school, we need to actually bring this in our conversations on a regular basis. As human beings, we make a lot of assumptions at times. We have to look at always asking ourselves, intuitively, I think we're doing well in a particular area. So we always bring it back to the data. What does the data say? What's the progress showing us? And do we know how to move forward with this? And making important real-time pivots to the plans based on the conversations around data. So throughout the year, not just at the beginning of the year, this is where we're at the end of the year, this is where we're at. Because it's an ongoing process about reflection as well, and about students. And the overall misses, I think, despite all these great things that we've done, I don't think we were successful, at least when I left, and I'm sure it's an ongoing journey. I think the big goal to look at is it needs to become part of the school's DNA. As I mentioned, this is a transient, international schools are transient schools. So the institutional memory needs to stay with the institution. It's not okay for it to leave with the leadership. It's not okay for it to change based on the values unless the whole team looks at it and develops and looks at a new vision and new shared values and new purpose. So protocols and timelines and expectations, just like we have handbooks for assessments, just like we have handbooks for students and staff, perhaps one of the things that we could look at doing was putting all that information in a place in the handbook and the timeline as well. We have guidelines and guidebooks for divisions, for EAL, for departments. So perhaps that's something that we can have data. What is data for our school? What does it mean? And how do we go about using data? So it's in the school versus with the people. And another one, growing data expertise and data literacy among individuals at all levels. As I mentioned earlier, having a very clear idea of who needs to have training, how often do they need to have training, and every year to ensure that it's revisited and based on the needs that it happens. When you have a new team, you need to start looking at providing PD or professional growth and ensuring that there's literacy for those new people in those different roles. Growing expertise at all levels in the leadership and growing expertise and literacy among all new employees. It's important not to forget that when you do onboarding, that all the new employees have the same training or are brought up to speed as the other teams, because when new people come in, they have different values, they have different focuses, they have different strengths as well. We want to make sure that everyone has the same literacy and ability to analyze the data. And while we did this and we provided training for some, there's so much to do at the beginning of the year when you're new and you're overwhelmed. So it's important that we look at this and say, well, how are we going to put this as a priority? Because it's a school priority while ensuring that they receive the support, and it's an ongoing journey and support for those new individuals as well. So it does not lose impact. And those were our experiences, and I'm sure other schools have as well. One of the things that Education Elements uses is they have this model that they look at and they say what to look for in a data culture. They developed beliefs and they developed elements. And so what they did, they took those beliefs and they say, as a school, you've got certain sets of belief if you're a data culture school. And they took those beliefs and they embedded them in those elements. And as I mentioned earlier, while we did not adopt this model, this is something that actually is good to look at, because when you're doing data culture in your school and having conversations and using protocols, you will see you're touching upon all of these elements. So one thing that they have that is quite useful that I find that when you look at later on as we're going through the process, it's a checklist, because it tells you how they all align and it tells you how are we doing as a data culture as a school and what are some areas I could pay more attention to. So it's a useful tool, not necessarily to say use it and follow it holistically, but it's a useful resource. And there's a lot of resources and information on LAC dashboard as well that is worth looking at. For today, what I've done, I've put a list of resources, things that I've used for today's presentation and for all the resources that we have. And I'll be happy to share those after, once we share the recording, along with a list of protocols that everyone has put into the chat box. And with that, thank you so much for your time. And I hope that our journey kind of resonates with you on some level, kind of inspired in some way. And I'm sure we can all learn a lot from each other, because what works in one context does not work in another. However, we do know that some things work for all schools as well. So hopefully with today's time and session, we can all leave with something. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And I'm gonna stop.
It's so great to hear the successes and also the challenges. And one thing I noticed is what you were calling misses. To me, I was like, I know this sounds a little bit lame, but I was like, they're not misses, they're opportunities, you know, for what can come next and where you can go next, and so that's really exciting. So thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Lara or any comments?
Great.
All
Thank
right.
you so much for your time. And I appreciate you sharing, sharing those 30 minutes actually 50 minutes with me. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.